Welcome to the debate. Imagine the ancient myth of, well, the Sword of Damocles, a king seeking to demonstrate the constant, just suffocating dread that accompanies absolute power, seats a man on this golden throne, and he suspends a heavy, sharpened blade directly above his head, held by nothing more than a single hair from a horse's tail.
Sounds stressful.
It is a brilliant illustration of peril. Now, scale that image up to a cosmic level. Imagine sitting beneath that sword, alone in a subterranean bunker, not for a single evening banquet, but for 62 years, and the sword isn't just pointed at you, it is pointed at two entire civilizations.
And you are the only one holding the shears, right? Constantly deciding whether to just snap that single hair.
Today, we are examining the concept of the Swordholder from Liu Cixin's The Dark Forest and Death's End. We are looking specifically at Luo Ji, humanity's inaugural swordholder, who maintained this interstellar staring contest with the alien Trisolarans for over half a century.
Which is just a massive chunk of a human lifespan.
Yeah, it is. So the central question we are exploring is this. What is the true psychological toll of maintaining this standoff? And, what kind of personality is actually required to hold the fate of two worlds in their hands for decades? I will be arguing that maintaining the swordholder deterrence represents the ultimate triumph of rational philosophical discipline. It requires a stoic who leverages cosmic realism to endure immense personal sacrifice.
And I will be arguing that the role fundamentally requires an inherently irrational or illogical psychology, making it this completely dehumanizing paradox where the only credible guardians are those broken enough to actually push the button.
Well, we have to first look at the sheer philosophical weight of what Luo Ji actually accomplished to understand why his tenure is a testament to human adaptability. I mean, the universe of this material operates on cosmic sociology.
Survival of the fittest on a galactic scale.
Exactly. Luo Ji deduces its two central axioms. First, survival is the primary need of any civilization. Second, the universe has finite resources, but life expands exponentially. Because of the vast distances of space, there is an inescapable chain of suspicion.
If Civilization A discovers Civilization B, A cannot possibly know if B is benevolent.
Right, and even if B is benevolent, A cannot know if B believes A is benevolent. Therefore, the most rational action upon discovering another species is to immediately destroy them before a technological explosion allows them to destroy you. Luo Ji internalizes this dark forest hypothesis, and he transforms from an unserious, laid-back academic into a completely detached cosmic guardian. By heavily compartmentalizing his emotions and relying on highly specific psychological anchors, primarily the idealized love for his wife, Zhuang Yan, and their child, he just prunes away the irrelevant parts of his psyche. He maintains a perfectly rational, credible threat for over half a century without cracking.
Okay, but that assumes human psychology operates like a neat mathematical equation, which it doesn't. If we view this through the lens of game theory, specifically an extensive form game with sequential and incomplete information, the swordholder role is an unsustainable psychological trap.
Break down the extensive form game part for a second.
Sure. So when we say extensive form game, we simply mean a game that happens in steps, like chess. Trisolaris makes a move, Earth makes a move. But unlike chess, the players cannot see the whole board, and the aliens cannot completely decode the psychological state of the human holding the button.
Because they can't read minds, yeah.
Right. The deterrence relies on Trisolaris believing there is an overwhelmingly high probability that Luo Ji will broadcast their mutual coordinates to the Dark Forest if they attack. But a truly rational person would never actually press the button once an attack is underway.
Because doing so guarantees the destruction of both worlds.
Exactly. Therefore, Trisolaris will only be deterred by someone they perceive as fundamentally irrational. Someone willing to act out of sheer spite or dogmatic vengeance. The decades of isolation do not forge a disciplined guardian. They demand a psychological hostage teetering on the edge of madness, and the process severely erodes their humanity.
Look, a listener might assume,
sitting alone in a room for 62 years is just an extreme test of patience, but we need to look at the physiological reality of the deterrence room.
It's basically a tomb.
It is. Luo Ji is in a deep, white-walled underground bunker. He sits facing a blank wall. But he isn't just alone with his thoughts. He knows that the trisolarian Sophons are watching him.
The multidimensional supercomputers, yeah.
Right. Trisolaris unfolded protons into supercomputers and shot them to Earth. They are invisible, they are everywhere, and they are monitoring his pupil dilation, his heart rate, and his microexpressions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It's not just a staring contest, it's a 6-decade physiological masquerade. The United Nations actively manipulated him into this by sending his wife and child into the future via hibernation. They gave him a lifeline, and he took that manipulation and turned it into fuel. He built a psychological shield of pure detachment. If you are sitting beneath that sword of Damocles, knowing supercomputers are reading your sweat glands for any sign of weakness, a rational actor must build that exact shield just to survive the daily dread.
But the text explicitly details the extreme personal cost of this isolation, which directly contradicts the idea of a clean, rational shield.
How so?
Well, Luo Ji suffers from severe alcoholism early on. He falls into deep, paralyzing depression. When he finally does see his wife and child again after stepping down, they end up leaving him.
Yeah, they do.
They abandon him because the burden he carries has fundamentally altered him. He has become monstrous in their eyes. This isn't a monk-like adaptation to a difficult environment. This is the total erosion of a man's identity. I mean, he spends his final years as the lone human on Pluto, acting as a literal tomb keeper for human artifacts. He is far more ghost than man by the end. The deterrence didn't forge him. It hollowed him out until there was nothing left but the threat.
But the hollowing out is the discipline. You are describing the destruction of a man, but I see the refinement of a weapon.
A weapon?
Yes. He strips away the superficial, hedonistic layers of his previous life to become the pure embodiment of the threat. The isolation is the crucible that burns away the irrelevant parts of his psyche.
But at what point does the cost negate the triumph? Is it truly a victory of rationality if the mechanism requires you to destroy your own humanity in order to save humanity? This leads directly to the game theory of the Dark Forest. We have to analyze why the deterrence mechanism demands this exact eroded mental state to function effectively.
It demands it because the stakes are absolute. We are talking about mutual assured destruction. The threat must be credible.
It appears similar to Cold War MAD, sure, but the payoff structure is fundamentally asymmetrical. For the deterrence to hold, Trisolaris must calculate that the Swordholder will trigger the signal. But look at the options if deterrence fails.
Trisolaris attacks conventionally.
Right, using their droplets, those invincible probes held together by strong nuclear force that can smash through Earth's stellar fleets like bullets through glass. Trisolaris does not use their own dark forest broadcast because they actually want Earth's solar system for themselves. So if they launch a droplet attack, humanity is doomed to lose a conventional war. Earth's only retaliation is to broadcast the coordinates of both planets to the universe, inviting a mysterious third party to annihilate everyone.
Which is the cornerstone of the deterrence. Trisolaris knows Earth will flip the board if they are about to lose.
But think about the pure logic of the moment of failure. The droplet attack has happened. Earth's defenses are shattered. Humanity is already doomed. Pressing the button at that specific moment does not save Earth. It only destroys Trisolaris out of revenge.
Right.
So, from a strictly logical game theory perspective, pressing the button after your own civilization is defeated is entirely irrational. It is holding a hostage with a bomb strapped to your own chest, but the hostage taker knows the police won't shoot because the blast will take out the whole city block.
Okay, I follow the analogy.
If the police do shoot you, detonating the bomb as you bleed out doesn't save your life. It is pure spite. Therefore, for the Swordholder to be a credible deterrent, Trisolaris must perceive them as illogical.
You are focusing entirely on the failure state, though. The entire architecture of deterrence is designed to never reach that state. That relies on strict, calculated rationality, not the illusion of madness.
But
Let me finish. Luo Ji's credibility does not come from Trisolaris thinking he is a madman. It comes from his deep, rational understanding of cosmic sociology. He proved this empirically when he successfully cast a spell on the star 187J3X1.
The test broadcast.
Right. He didn't just write a theory, he ran an experiment. He used the sun as an antenna to broadcast the specific coordinates of a distant star. By doing so, he essentially painted a target on its back. When that star was annihilated centuries later by a light-speed projectile from an unknown third party, he proved that the cosmos is full of hidden hunters. Trisolaris knows that Luo Ji understands the universe better than anyone else. That is rational credibility.
His understanding of the universe is rational, yes, but his implementation of the deterrence was anything but. How did he actually force the standoff in the first place?
With the bombs in the dust cloud.
Exactly. He dug his own grave next to Yi Wenji's. He wore a biometric monitor linked to a cradle of nuclear bombs placed in orbit around the sun, hidden in a dust cloud. If his heart stopped, the bombs would detonate, creating a Morse code flicker in the dust that would broadcast Trisolaris' location to the entire cosmos.
Brilliant strategy.
He essentially put a gun to his own head and told the aliens, "Stop the invasion or I will pull this trigger, stop my own heart and doom us all." That is reckless, almost suicidal brinkmanship. A standard sane human operator cannot replicate that posture for 62 years. It requires a fundamental disconnect from self-preservation.
Well, overcoming biological self-preservation for the sake of civilizational survival is the very peak of philosophical discipline. It is the elevation of the mind over the instinct of the body. And to prove that standard human rationality and empathy cannot sustain this staring contest, we only need to look at what happens the very moment Luo Ji steps down and hands the detonator over.
Ah, the transition of power to Chengxin.
Yes, Luo Ji passes the mantle to Chengxin, and within a matter of minutes, literally minutes, Trisolaris launches an attack and destroys Earth's broadcasting capabilities.
They moved fast.
Because Trisolaris used the phones to analyze human society, and specifically analyze Chengxin, they calculated that her deterrence credibility was essentially zero. She is chosen by the people of Earth precisely because she represents a softer, kinder, more empathetic evolution of humanity. She is the antithesis of the jaded, hardened Luo Ji.
True.
Her immediate failure proves the premise. The role requires an iron-willed, stoic detachment. Chengxin had empathy, and her empathy made her hesitate when the droplet struck. Her hesitation proved she lacked the necessary discipline to maintain the dark forest.
I have to push back there. Her hesitation wasn't a failure of discipline. It was a triumph of morality. There is a powerful real-world historical parallel here. Stanislav Petrov.
The Soviet officer from the 80s?
Yeah, in 1983. Petrov was in a secret bunker when the early warning systems indicated that the United States had launched nuclear missiles at the USSR. The sirens were blaring. His orders, his duty, and his training dictated that he report this and initiate a retaliatory nuclear strike. He had minutes to decide the fate of the world.
But he didn't do it.
Right. He judged it to be a false alarm, and he refused to push the button. He chose not to be the man who ended the world. Now, Chengxin's situation was not a false alarm. She knew the Trisolaran attack was real. But her choice not to push the button was the ultimate moral victory. She realized that pressing it wouldn't save humanity. It would only invite the dark forest strike that would destroy Trisolaris alongside Earth. She chose loyalty to life itself over tribalism and revenge.
But you are treating the Swordholder like a moral arbiter of life in the universe? The job description is simply to be the ultimate liar, a threat. The entire deterrence era existed only because Trisolaris mathematically calculated that Luo Ji would push the button.
Yes, a mathematical calculation of spite.
If Chengxin wasn't capable of pulling the trigger out of some sort of cosmic morality, she never should have accepted the role. Doesn't her empathy, her inability to commit an act of cosmic spite, actually make her the most dangerous person to put in that room? Because of her moral victory, humanity's broadcast arrays were destroyed, and the entire human race was forced into a brutal, genocidal occupation in Australia.
She was selected precisely because humanity had grown comfortable and wanted a maternal, non-threatening figure. It was a collective failure of society to understand the dark forest. But her refusal to press the button highlights the tragic paradox of the Swordholder. The deterrence system asks a human being to be ready every second of every day to commit xenocide, to extinguish billions of lives without a second thought. You argue that empathy makes her a liability. I argue that a system requiring the suppression of all empathy inevitably creates monsters.
But the universe is a dark forest. It is a place where every civilization is an armed hunter stalking through the trees like a ghost. If you do not have a monster guarding your campfire, the other monsters will eat you.
A bleak way to look at it, but accurate to the text.
Exactly. Which leads us directly to the ultimate question of personality requirements. If empathy fails and if standard rationality is insufficient, who is actually suited to shoulder this burden?
Someone like Thomas Wade was the only correct choice for the system as it was designed.
Wade? Really?
Yes, Wade was a man entirely devoid of the paralyzing effects of empathy. His governing philosophy was advance, advance, advance. When it came time to select a new swordholder, Wade actually attempted to assassinate Cheng Xin just to secure the position for himself.
Well, he certainly had the drive.
He was irrationally convinced that Trisolarian occupation was a fate far worse than a quick death by a dark forest strike. True deterrence requires someone mentally sealed into a dogmatic, ruthless worldview. If you want the deterrence to hold, you don't need a philosopher, you need a fanatic. You need someone whose psychology is so rigid that the enemy mathematically calculates a 100% probability of retaliation.
See, I disagree. A fanatic is too predictable, and predictability is a vulnerability. I assert that Luo Ji was perfect synthesis, and his success was born from his highly unusual origins. Think about who Luo Ji was at the start of the crisis.
A playboy, basically.
Right, he was an unserious hedonistic sociologist who cared more about drinking and dating than the fate of the world. He didn't have a traditional hero complex.
He was incredibly self-centered. He used his immense Wallfacer budget to build himself a luxury estate rather than design weapons.
And that is exactly why he succeeded. Because he wasn't burdened by the heavy, moralizing hero complex that crushes normal people, he could view the cosmos with cold realism. He didn't agonize over the philosophical weight of humanity's soul, he just looked at the math of survival.
He certainly didn't care about the soul of humanity early on.
When he was finally forced to care, when the United Nations sent his wife and child away to force him to work, he didn't become a fanatic like Wade, he became a disciplined realist. Luo Ji succeeded not because he learned to love humanity, but because he weaponized his own apathy. The ultimate guardian of life had to be a man who could easily detach himself from it. He forged an iron will not out of madness, but out of absolute, crystalline clarity about the nature of the universe.
Okay, but framing it as crystalline clarity ignores the profound psychological damage done to him. The tragedy of Luo Ji is that he had to weaponize his own apathy. He started as a man who didn't care about the world, yes, but to maintain the deterrence, he had to freeze himself in a state of hypervigilant trauma.
Trauma is a strong word for duty.
It's accurate, though. He wasn't achieving philosophical enlightenment in that bunker. He was enduring a 62-year-long panic attack, suppressed only by sheer mental exhaustion. The fact that the only person who could save humanity was someone who initially didn't care about it is a dark irony. The psychology of the staring contest requires you to amputate the very things that make you human.
We celebrate soldiers who throw themselves on a grenade to save their squad, sacrificing their physical bodies. Luo Ji threw himself on a psychological grenade for 62 years.
But
He sacrificed his normal human life, his emotional availability, and his connection to his family, all to keep the Trisolarans at bay. He became the wall between humanity and extinction. That is not a loss of humanity. It is the most profound expression of love for it.
I think that is a highly romantic way of looking at a man driven to the very edge of sanity. When he finally hands over the detonator to Cheng Xin, the text describes him as incredibly old, silent, almost a statue. He has entirely lost the ability to relate to the society he saved.
Society was pretty ungrateful, to be fair.
The public doesn't even thank him. They want to put him on trial for the star he destroyed during his initial test of the dark forest theory. He's deeply isolated and alienated. The universe demanded an irrational, vengeful credibility, and it stripped away everything else.
Yet he never broke. For over 2 decades of thousands of days, through societal shifts, through the hatred of the very people he was protecting, his finger never slipped. That level of self-control is unparalleled. It shows how an ordinary, flawed human can leverage cosmic realism to forge absolute discipline.
He didn't blink. But the system was a house of cards. It relied on a single point of failure, one human mind. The moment you introduce a human being with a normal, healthy psychology, like Cheng Shen, the house of cards collapses. The dark force theory might govern the stars, but human psychology was never meant to operate on a galactic scale.
It is definitely a strain.
The staring contest is a tragic paradox, because you cannot ask a human to act like a fundamental force of physics without destroying them in the process.
Well, we have clearly illuminated the immense complexity of this role. It seems we both acknowledge that the swordholder burden demands a total sacrifice of a normal life, leaving the individual deeply alienated from the very species they are tasked with saving.
Yeah, whether it is a triumph of will or a descent into madness, the personal cost is absolute.
To summarize my position, the swordholder burden reveals the vital necessity of cosmic realism. Luo Ji proves that an ordinary person can forge an iron will and exercise absolute, rational discipline to protect a civilization, even if the cost is his own soul.
And to summarize mine, the psychology of the interstellar staring contest is a devastating trap. The game theory of the dark forest demands an irrational, vengeful credibility that strips away the empathy and humanity the swordholder is supposed to be protecting. It forces the guardian to become a monster.
The material offers us profound questions about the nature of survival, power, and morality in an indifferent universe. It invites all of us to look at our own psychology and wonder what we would do in the dark.
It forces you to ask if survival is worth the cost of the humanity you are trying to save.
We started today by talking about the sword of Damocles, a blade hanging by a single horsehair, threatening annihilation at any given second. If you were seated on that throne, staring up at the gleaming edge of destruction, knowing the fate of billions rested on your silence, and knowing the enemy was watching your every breath, would you have the discipline to sit perfectly still for a lifetime, or would you reach up and snap the hair yourself?
There is certainly much more to explore in this material.
Thank you for listening.